And we continue at 2:05 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wangs across the glass.
John, it is Friday. It is payday, so get like Cecily Meyer Cruz and
get that money.
What do you think she's doing this weekend?
Demanding more.
We demand higher pay.
That's always a safe bet.
That is fantastic.
800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is the ABC News legal analyst and host of the Too Many Lawyers podcast, which you can download wherever you download your favorite podcast, Mr. Royal Oakes. Royal, welcome.
Thank you, John. How are you?
I'm good, and such a great day to talk to you because so many subjects to get to, so many legal subjects in the news. Let's start with the tragic news from the week, which is the plane crash that took place in the nation's capital earlier this week, where you had a military aircraft collide with an American Airlines CRJ commercial airline jet. Everyone involved in the crash died, sadly, and now people are trying to figure out just exactly what happened. How did that crash occur? American Airlines is already out there saying that they are not responsible for this crash. Based on all the videos that I have seen, it looked like their plane was doing exactly what it should be doing as it was preparing to land there at Reagan National Airport. And then a military helicopter was flying at an altitude they weren't supposed to be flying at. They were ignoring the air traffic controllers, and they flew right into the side of that plane. Based on everything that we know so far, who's looking like they're most likely going to be liable for this?
Well, as you say, the report is that the military helicopter was not flying at the correct altitude. And that just horrific video that most of us have seen now, where you see the helicopter just smash into the plane and then a giant ball of fire. So that's one theory, is that the Army helicopter may have deviated from its approved flight path near the airport. The other issue that's out there, John, as you know, is that according to one air traffic controller who was on duty at the time, that he was doing a job supposedly handled by two people, and therefore perhaps the air traffic controllers or whoever are in charge of them are to blame. But it is so early. Now, they did recover what they call the black boxes. They're actually orange, I'm told. There's a black box with the cockpit voice recorder and also flight data recorder. They have not yet analyzed that. There was a New York Times investigative series a year or so ago that found an alarming pattern of close calls involving major airlines. So much more to be determined and discovered and analyzed. But yeah, the early indications are it possibly was a result of shorthandedness up in the tower, but also possibly the result of the military aircraft being at the wrong altitude.
If the air traffic controllers were short-staffed, but the information, the relevant information was communicated to the military aircraft to stay away from that airplane, does it matter in terms of the courts if they were understaffed, if they still performed the duties that they were supposed to perform?
No, it really shouldn't matter. I mean, if whoever was on duty did the right thing, it doesn't matter if you should have had 10 people instead of one, if the one person did the right thing. Now, of course, psychologically, if that fact ever pops up in a court proceeding, some sort of adversary proceeding, it might make a difference. But it's the kind of thing, frankly, a judge would probably exclude as being not helpful at all and definitely prejudicial. So in terms of the losses, there are rules about how much compensation families of victims get. Generally, it's capped at $143,000 roughly, if there is no negligence. But if a party can establish negligence on the part of the aircraft or somebody else, then they could get much more than the basic $143,000. And of course, we know from wrongful death cases in general, if you can demonstrate wrongful conduct, negligence, it kind of depends on the person's status, and it seems wrong to value a person's life based on how old they were or how much money they made. But that's the way it's done. If you sue for a family member having been killed wrongfully, wrongful death, and the family member is a 75-year-old pauper with no economic prospects, he's going to get X dollars. If the person who was killed is a 25-year-old, tech billionaire, then that person is going to get a whole lot more money. That's just the way the legal system is set up.
I don't know if you're a Breaking Bad guy, but there was a storyline in that television series where you had an air traffic controller who was going through personal anguish and wasn't all there while on the job and screwed up, and two planes collided with one another in the sky, and that became a storyline in the television show.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I loved Breaking Bad, and of course I loved the follow-up series, Better Call Saul, with Bob Odenkirk, and because I love the story about how they came up with the name, John, for Saul Goodman. It was his invented name. I don't want to have any spoilers here, but he changed his name, and somebody said, well, how'd you come up with the name Saul Goodman? And it's because somebody would say, hey, how you doing? And he'd always say, Saul Good, man. Saul Good, man. So that's how he came up with the name.
Fun fact, in Breaking Bad, the newscaster who reported on that crash was Fox 11's Marla Tejas.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, that's cool to see real live anchors and reporters occasionally pop up in the movies and TV. I think I've seen Frank Motek a few times take a star turn in a couple of shows.
We're speaking with Royal Oakes, ABC News legal analyst. Royal, let's talk about the fires, because I've seen a lot of homeowners on television recently who have lost their homes to the fires, who said that they are on the FAIR plan, which is the plan of last resort, because prior to the fires, they were dropped from State Farm after being longtime customers of State Farm Insurance. State Farm determined that the Pacific Palisades in particular was too risky for their blood, and they dropped a lot of longtime customers, and some of those customers then had their homes burned down in the fire, and now they're going to try to get their money from the FAIR plan instead of State Farm, and that is a very different proposition if you're trying to collect on an insurance policy in terms of what you should be expecting.
Yeah, that's right. The FAIR Plan deal, it's for the high-risk areas. It costs more. The benefits aren't necessarily as high as you could get. I think the insurance companies are in fairly strong position here legally. For example, some people are saying, well, State Farm shouldn't have non-renewed a bunch of folks in the Palisades and other parts of Los Angeles. They knew that this is a dangerous area. But nobody has a crystal ball, and it's not like State Farm non-renewed them after the fire started to blaze. And the fact is, legally, State Farm has a basis short of some sort of statute that requires them to stick in. They generally have a basis to non-renew people as long as they're abiding by the contract. And you don't know that there's going to be a disaster. So people might say, well, it sounds like bad faith, but I think the fact is the insurance companies are going to be off the hook. But of course, fortunately, there are other ways people can get help if they did have homeowners insurance. And of course, most people did. They get their coverage there. Sometimes FEMA kicks in, other government programs. But you have a constant fight with the insurance companies over their desire to move around and non-renew and maybe leave the state. But in general, they have a right to do that. I mean, we have thousands of insurance companies in the state, all competing with the lowest possible cost to best possible benefits. That's just the way the market system works. But the regulators sometimes are very sensitive to the idea that rates seem high. So the regulators say, well, you can't charge that, at which point the insurance company has a right to say, well, we're leaving the market. We're non-renewing. We're just not selling in certain areas. As long as it isn't discrimination, redlining based on some sort of racial issue, they legally have a right to do that.
What do you think the takeaway is for the insurance companies? That they made the right call by dropping these customers, and more Californians should probably expect to be dropped from their policies?
Yeah, I think the bottom line is so important in that field as in any private industry. If they're going to take a bath and face insolvency because they felt sorry for folks who live in dangerous, high-risk areas and sold a lot of policies, then they're going to be out of business because their investors aren't going to put up with it. Their shareholders aren't going to put up with it. So they're going to get some bad PR, certainly. But at the end of the day, I think the insurance companies are going to be feeling like they made the right economic decision in limiting their liability, even though obviously that results in some individual tragic situations where people went bare and now they've lost their home.
If the state of California is going to get serious about keeping these insurance companies in the state of California selling policies and doing business, what is the state going to have to do?
I think the state has to be fair and reasonable in terms of its regulation. The law says that the insurance commissioner, the state of California, has a right to go in and say, okay, Mr. Insurance Company, you charged a rate that was discriminatory, and that should be shut down. They also have a right to say, hey, you charged a rate that was inadequate. It really should have been higher. Why would you do that? Well, you figure you'll get lucky as an insurance company. You'll sell a lot of policies. But the insurance commissioner knows that that's a bad thing because the insurance companies could go broke and then a bunch of people might not get paid in full. And so they have to make sure that the rates are high enough. And then the regulator has to make sure that the rate isn't too high. Well, what does that mean, really? If a rate is too high, I mean, if the cost of a loaf of bread is too high, when they're at Ralph's, people will just say, instead of good stuff, I'm going to buy Kroger. And it's the same deal with insurance companies. There are literally hundreds and thousands of insurance companies you can pick from. And if you think the rate is too high, then you go elsewhere. Well, if everybody's rate seems high, maybe it's because the exposure is so high that the rate should be at that level. And then folks can have the argument about, capitalism versus socialism, welfare. Are we going to give breaks to people? Are we going to have government insurance? Are we going to somehow, with tax dollars, make insurance cheaper? It's a complicated process, but at the end of the day, the insurance companies are probably in pretty solid shape in terms of what they've been charging in California.
There is some video of one of the fires where it looks like that particular fire could have been started by equipment belonging to Southern California Edison. There are already lawsuits that have been filed against Southern California Edison, alleging that they were the ones that started the fire. Edison is denying that. They're saying that they don't have any internal information suggesting that their equipment started the fire. In fact, they're claiming the opposite, that they do not believe that their equipment started the fire. How much trouble is Southern California Edison looking at right now based on what you've seen?
Well, probably a lot of trouble, because what I've heard is that there are surveillance cameras and closed-circuit TV cameras that show sparks coming from Edison Towers that may have caused the Eden Canyon fire. Now, maybe they have some solid answers to that, but that sounds pretty incriminating. But, I mean, John, there are just so many bases for people to be unhappy and to file suits. The water supply, the 117 million gallon reservoir we've all been talking about, the faulty equipment, failure to power down the equipment in the hours leading up to the conflagration, failure to warn people. They had rolling warnings with some areas, including parts of Altadena. They were kind of the last to learn, cutting the fire department budget. So all of these things can happen. The interesting thing, John, is that there's a special law in California. It's known by different fancy legal terms. But basically, it boils down to automatic liability for utilities. Even if the utility did nothing wrong, no negligence, and complied with all regulations, they still have to pay for fire damage if their equipment was involved in causing the fire, even again in the absence of their negligence. If you do show negligence, then you can get even more money, like punitive damages and so on. But automatic liability exists for these utilities. And the idea is, well, they can just charge other folks a little more down the road and make it up that way. Everybody shares the risk and the problem. But utilities don't have a good time in court. And as we know from recent years, big fires, some of them just have to go bankrupt. That's the only way they can survive, is to get relief from the bankruptcy courts.
If they're found liable, is that where you think they're headed?
Yeah, I think so. If they are found liable, we've seen bankruptcy filings before, and it's not that they go away. They just say, look, we can't pay all this stuff. We're going to be in a hole forever, so we're just going to gather all our assets, give it to you, judge, and you decide through a claim process who gets it. And then some debts are forgiven, some things that they owe just go away, and then they start fresh, just like anybody gets a fresh start as a result of the bankruptcy laws.
Los Angeles County has a new district attorney. No longer is soft on crime Soros-funded George Gascon the DA. We now have Nathan Hochman as the district attorney, and he is posturing much more aggressively at those who were caught looting on the homes that were abandoned due to the fires. And now you have other scammers who are coming out of the woodwork trying to take advantage of people who lost their homes in the fires. What do you think those criminals are looking at with Nathan Hochman as opposed to George Gascon?
Oh, he's going to come down hard on them. It is such a stark contrast to how George Gascon would have handled it. And it's great that Hochman is sending the message out. He's been at a bunch of press conferences and meetings where all the officials stand up there and he says, we're coming after you. If you try to exploit people at the lowest point of their lives, you are going to get hit hard. And of course, we know George Gascon would say, well, let's not be hasty. Did the scammers have a rough childhood? Are they 17? Because if they're only 17, I'm going to try them as juveniles, even if they've been scamming people for years. What about the ethnicity of the scammers? Do we really want to criminalize more marginalized citizens? Fortunately, John, that kind of rhetoric is in L.A. County's rearview mirror, at least for the next 4 years with the new DA.
We're speaking with Royal Oakes, ABC News legal analyst and co-host of the Too Many Lawyers podcast. Royal, California is a sanctuary state. We've been that way for a while. The federal government under President Donald Trump is finally starting to get serious at deporting people who are in the country illegally. There have been some sheriffs here in California who have gone to the attorney general asking for advice, saying, hey, what do we do? Because state law is very different from what the feds are saying. And we don't want to be cut off of federal dollars if we aren't compliant with what the feds are asking from us. Yet if we do what the feds are asking from us, the Attorney General of California might throw us in jail for breaking state law. What are these sheriffs supposed to do when you have one thing coming from the state and another thing coming from the feds?
It is a huge problem, isn't it? I mean, because they don't know what to do. You got the feds and the state disagreeing, and of course you've got an attorney general in California, Rob Bonta. I mean, this guy couldn't organize a 2-car funeral. All he comes up with is platitudes, and so he's of no help. But I mean, from the federal government standpoint, they're saying to sheriffs, look, cooperate with us, detain and transfer undocumented immigrants who have been arrested for crimes. You should honor the ICE detainer request, asking local jails to hold folks for 2 days beyond their release date so that ICE can take custody. But then the state, as you say, they come along and say, don't you dare enforce federal immigration laws. That is a federal responsibility, not a local one. We have a sanctuary state law in California that bans state and local law enforcement from using any resources to help federal immigration enforcement. So they're whipsawed. I mean, being a sheriff is tough enough without having conflicting, totally inconsistent instructions from 2 gigantic governmental entities, the state and the feds.
If you're the sheriff and you're a Republican and you support Donald Trump and you support his policies and you want to crack down on the border, this may provide you with an opportunity, because if you say, all right, I'm going to align with Donald Trump, I'm going to do what he asks of me, and Rob Bonta can go pound sand, and Rob Bonta tries to throw you in jail or remove you from office or punish you in some way, my guess is that's going to be national news, and you're going to get on Donald Trump's radar quickly.
No, I agree. And whereas the sheriffs were in a real pickle before Trump came along in the Biden administration, yes, you have ICE at the federal level, and you have some people in power who are urging the local authorities to help ICE. But basically, the head guy, Biden and his attorney general, they were on the side of Rob Bonta and the California approach. They were sympathetic to the sanctuary deal. Now, as you say, with a new sheriff in town, so to speak, in Washington, D.C., I think it's going to make life a little easier for the law enforcement folks around California who are worried about getting slammed by the state AG and so on. But also they figure that the full force of the federal government, from the president to the new head of ICE to other cabinet members, are going to have their back.
And because Rob Bonta wants to run for governor, my guess is he has every motivation in the world to make as big of a deal out of this as possible because he believes it would benefit him politically.
No, you're right. But I think he's going to have to go through Kamala Harris to become governor of California.
Very good point. Royal Oakes, ABC News legal analyst, co-host of the Too Many Lawyers podcast. Royal, what's coming up on the next podcast?
Oh, fun episode. I landed an interview with Marcia Clark, lead prosecutor in the O.J. Simpson case. This is the 30th anniversary of the world's worst not guilty verdict, actually in the entire galaxy. And so I got some fascinating and shocking insights from Marcia Clark. So check out the next episode of Too Many Lawyers, and now it's on video. If you'd like to see how Marcia looks these days, you don't want to see how I look, but she's on the screen most of the time.
All right. Well, I'll be listening, and you can download the Too Many Lawyers podcast wherever you download your favorite podcast. Royal Oakes, thanks so much for stopping by.
You bet. Thanks.
It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is the president of the Advocates for Victims of Illegal Alien Crime, Don Rosenberg. Don, welcome.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by on this Friday. You have long been an advocate at enforcing border policy, making sure that people, particularly criminals who are in the country illegally, are sent back to their country of origin. And it seems like regardless of which administration you're talking about, whether it was Obama or Bush or Biden, there was this consensus that that would be not good, that they essentially advocated for open border policies, and it was very difficult to get anyone out of the country who was here illegally, even if they were breaking the law. Well, there is a new sheriff in town in Donald Trump, and he seems very serious at enforcing the law. We've seen a number of deportations already, including for people who have rap sheets that go on for a mile long. What's your reaction to what you're seeing going on right now in the country?
Well, I'm certainly happy that Trump won the election, and yes, he's very serious about getting these people out. And they've already started. Over the years, I've made good friends with Tom Homan, who's the ICE czar, and he's about the best guy you could possibly have to work on this. Of course, the problem is that Joe Biden made the problem double what it was before he took office. So you're now talking about, trying to remove 15 to 20 million, maybe even more people. And I can tell you, coming in, you can come in a lot faster than you can get them out. So obviously the first thing is you got to, secure the border, which Trump is doing. And they've already started the deportations. But the reality of it is it will take years and years and years. And that's with everybody's cooperation, which we know we're not going to get. But they all must go. The damage is incalculable and will last for decades, even if you could have everybody removed tomorrow. So, on one hand, very happy about this happening, but there's a long way to go to make this country safe, at least safe from illegal immigration and illegal aliens.
One of the things that they've decided to do is they've decided to be very public about it. I saw that I think it was Dr. Phil attended some of the raids. Tom Homan, who you mentioned, is participating in some of them. So is Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security. They want word to get out that they aren't putting up with this. Do you think because of that, because they're publicizing it the way that they are, they may not necessarily have to deport every single person who's here illegally? People may get the message that this administration is different, they're serious about it, and they might self-deport.
Well, I think that's definitely going to happen. It's funny when Mitt Romney was running against Obama, and he, made a statement that, we needed people to self-deport, and he got ridiculed for it. Now, I was not a particularly big Mitt Romney fan, but in the end of 2008 and 2009, when, we had the economy collapsed, over 1 million illegal aliens did self-deport. They couldn't get work, and they left. So clearly part of the solution is to cut off as many services as you possibly can, and quite frankly, make life miserable for people that are here illegally. So on one hand, it's good that they're showing that, especially now, because they are really going after the worst of the worst at this point. And unfortunately, the news media, most of the news media, lies about this and creates fear that's irrational. Sitting here, with headlines from the LA Times, and, it's one thing after another of why you should be afraid, even people that don't need to be afraid. So they really need to do that. They need to get the word out that you're going to go. You may not go today, you may not go tomorrow, but at some point you're going to be deported, and it'll be a lot easier on you if you decide to go on your own. So hopefully many will get the message.
As someone who's been advocating for this for a long time and engaged in the debate, you probably have a better idea as to what the answer to the next question is than I do. And that is, I don't know if you saw the video of a man who was here illegally from Haiti who had a rap sheet that went on forever. The guy clearly was a bad dude. He was here to break the law. He was here to prey on Americans, and he was finally caught. And he gave this lengthy speech about how Donald Trump is awful, how Joe Biden was great, and Barack Obama did everything for him, and he's not going back to Haiti. It doesn't matter what Donald Trump says. And then you cut to the next clip. It's Tom Homan on one of the cable news chat shows. What's going to happen to this guy? Oh, he's going back to Haiti. What's the argument that they give for keeping people like that in the country? People who are here to break the law and have demonstrated it over and over and over again, particularly with serious crimes. What is the argument on the other side?
Well, they never want to address the serious criminals. And ironically now, and literally over the last couple of weeks, whether it's the mayor of Chicago, the governor of Illinois, governor of Massachusetts, all of a sudden they're now to the point, well, oh yes, if you're a serial killer, you should be deported. And even Mayor Adams in New York made a comment, I support deporting, violent and serious criminals. Of course, the next question is, well, what about criminals that aren't serial killers or really, really serious, but they're criminals anyway, notwithstanding the fact that they're here illegally? And they're not ready to commit on that. And the argument's actually pretty simple. The first thing you always hear is, they want them to vote. Illegal aliens do not vote in a very high number. A few may, but that's not the issue. But they do vote by their physical presence, because their physical presence is what divides up in reapportionment congressional seats. So when you're looking at a couple million, maybe let's say 2-3 million illegal aliens in California, if they weren't counted in reapportionment, California would probably lose 5 to 8 congressional seats, and they would all go to red states. So they're technically supporting Democratic candidates by being here, even though they're not voting, that would be Republican candidates or Republican legislators in other states. That's number one. Number two is, by the same thing with reapportionment, there's money divvied up. So no politician wants to give up money that's going to their state. So, the number of people here, more money. They do get some support, although I think it started to wane in this last election, from people that are here, either citizens or just here legally, and a lot of these people are family members. So if they're a citizen and they're going to vote, who's going to vote to have their cousin removed? So there is a positive aspect there. And the last thing is, and this is really long term, but it happens every year, somewhere between 350 and 400,000 children born to illegal aliens, once they're in the country, so they're citizens, turn 18, and they can vote. Are they going to vote to have their parents deported? So there's a lot of benefits to the supporters of illegal immigration that they don't want to talk about, but they know that they're going to get that benefit. So that's the rationale. So, yeah, they may come out, and I saw this jerk, I think he was screaming out of a car window or something as they were hauling him away. Yeah, they'll be fine. Yeah, you deport that guy. But the numbers they want to deport are small. Let me rephrase that. The number of people that they're willing to even say you should deport, we're not going to help you, but you should deport them, are small compared to the total. Maybe 1.5 million to 20 million. So that's a trade they're willing to make. Fine, deport those people, but let the other 18.5 million stay. That's unacceptable.
When Kamala Harris was vice president, she was the border czar, and that, of course, blew up in her face like a hillbilly's rifle. In the election, Donald Trump just killed her on the subject of the border. That was one of her weakest subjects. You look at every poll that polled that particular issue, he had a huge advantage over her. You look at his approval rating since being elected, and his approval on the border is higher than just about every other subject. So Americans seem to be approving of what Trump is doing and disapproving of what the Democrats were doing. Have you seen any evidence at all that they are finding Jesus on this subject and they are going to, I guess, moderate their position to get a little bit closer to where public opinion is?
Other than moderating their position on serial killers and mass rapists, no. I think that, you may hear a little talk here or there, but if you listen, just listening to some of the hearings, that are going on for cabinet positions that, apply to that, and you hear some comments, again, listening to these mayors, reading the media, no, they have not learned anything. And what's so surprising is that even though the population as a whole has maybe, changed, a lot of them have changed their opinions and are now willing to say these people should be deported, they don't know the half of what's going on. I can't imagine what it would be if they really knew the truth. And I think some of that you saw. Greg Abbott should get a medal because shipping people to New York and Chicago and Denver all of a sudden woke some people up. Oh, my God, this is what's happening? Because all of a sudden they were in their backyard. But I can tell you, because I have relatives that live in New York City, and, if you live on 25th, street, you're furious because your school's been taken over to be a center for illegal aliens to live. But you go over to 35th Street and they're fine because nothing's happening to them directly. So I don't think the public knows as much as they should, and I certainly don't think the Democratic Party is willing to change their tune. I know the media isn't, but I don't think the Democratic Party is willing to change their tune either. They'll finagle a little bit here and there and give it, but no. They want these people to come in as fast as they can, and they want them to stay once they get here.
Don Rosenberg, president of Advocates for Victims of Illegal Alien Crime. You can get him online at aviac.us. Don, thanks so much for stopping by. Have a wonderful weekend.
Great, John. You too, and thanks so much for having me anytime.
All right. Right now it's time for KABC Dependable Traffic.